Tommy Walsh, Dean Roberts, and their partners in crime built a multi-million-pound drug and money laundering operation in the heart of Liverpool. For years, they stayed ahead of the law, but every secret leaves a trace, and this time, the authorities were watching. Liverpool was a city of contrasts. Its historic docks and bustling nightlife painted a picture of vibrancy and opportunity, yet beneath the surface, a darker world thrived. In the shadows of the city's cobblestone streets and derelict warehouses, criminal networks had quietly flourished for decades. But none had been as ruthless or sophisticated as the one controlled by 6 men who would come to define Liverpool's modern underworld. Each man had a different story. Some had grown up in deprived neighborhoods where crime was almost a rite of passage. Others had been outsiders, drawn by money and the thrill of power. Individually, they were clever, but together were unstoppable. By day, they appeared unremarkable. Some ran small businesses, others were seen driving luxury cars through familiar neighborhoods, and a few maintained the carefully constructed air of respectability that hid the truth. Yet behind closed doors they orchestrated a wholesale drug empire that stretched far beyond Liverpool's limits. Cocaine and heroin flowed into the city like water through hidden pipes, arriving in shipments meticulously disguised as legal goods. Containers labeled as food or industrial supplies were anything but innocent. Street-level dealers never saw the faces of the men behind the operation. For the 6, anonymity was power. Their system was built on precision and secrecy. They communicated through encrypted messaging apps, convinced their conversations could never be traced. Every transaction, every shipment, every instruction was cloaked in code words and false identities. At the time, law enforcement considered the network untouchable. Investigators had long suspected that Liverpool's rising drug problems were connected to a larger, organized structure, but every attempt to penetrate the group had ended in frustration. The men were always careful, always one step ahead. When raids occurred in the past, authorities found nothing concrete, only rumors and half-truths. But the gang's power was not just in their operational skills, it was in the fear they inspired. Those who crossed them, or even those who were suspected of doing so, disappeared from the streets. Threats were subtle, yet unmistakable: vandalized properties, sudden financial ruin, or mysterious warnings delivered to family members. These tactics created a climate of silence. Neighbors, friends, and even some local businesses turned a blind eye, unwilling to risk attention. The 6 men thrived in this environment, their empire growing with each shipment and each laundered pound. Despite their careful planning, cracks began to appear. The gang's reach had expanded beyond Liverpool into other cities, and with growth came exposure. They had established a network of legitimate businesses as fronts, cafes, car dealerships, warehouses, through which millions of pounds could be laundered. Each front appeared innocent, normal, and entirely legal, but inside, they were conduits for staggering sums of illicit cash. For years investigators had chased small leads, hoping to find a thread that would connect the visible business world to the invisible criminal web. All they had encountered until then were dead ends and whispered warnings. The 6 men were not reckless, but even the most careful operations leave traces, unbeknownst to them. A single encrypted chat message, almost overlooked, would become the key to unraveling the empire. At first, it seemed trivial, a simple instruction about moving money, but hidden within it were clues that investigators had never had before. This small breach, imperceptible to anyone outside law enforcement, would eventually allow authorities to begin piecing together the network of operations, revealing not just the drugs and money, but the hierarchy and roles of each member of the gang. Liverpool itself remained unaware of how deeply the network had infiltrated daily life. From the outside, life went on as usual. Families walked along the waterfront, students filled the city's cafes, and tourists marveled at the historic buildings. Yet beneath that normalcy, an empire of crime pulsed like a hidden heartbeat. Its operators moved in silence, calculating risk and reward with methodical precision, confident that no one would ever discover the truth. They were powerful, invisible, and untouchable, or so they believed. The calm before the storm would not last. The tiniest slip, the smallest overlooked detail, had set in motion a chain of events that would bring the gang's empire into the harsh glare of law enforcement scrutiny. The stage was being set for a showdown that would shake Liverpool to its core, exposing secrets that the six men had spent years hiding. What had seemed untouchable was about to be tested in ways no one could have imagined. For months, law enforcement had been chasing shadows. The gang's encrypted communications had proven nearly impenetrable, and every lead seemed to evaporate before investigators could act. The six men had anticipated almost every investigative method, and the digital walls they had built around their operation were formidable. But law enforcement had learned that even the most sophisticated systems have weaknesses, often hiding in the smallest details. It was one overlooked message that would mark the beginning of a breakthrough, a single piece of the puzzle that would eventually unravel years of careful planning. The message appeared insignificant at first glance. It was nothing more than an instruction about moving funds between accounts, hidden among countless other digital conversations. But cyber experts noticed a pattern in the way the message was phrased, subtle irregularities that suggested it was part of a larger network of transactions. Analysts began to trace the digital fingerprints of the message, following the path it had taken across servers, devices, and encrypted channels. What started as a minor observation quickly evolved into a lifeline, revealing a hidden structure in the gang's connections that law enforcement had never accessed before. Over the next several months, a specialized team worked around the clock, painstakingly decrypting layer after layer of digital protection. Every breakthrough revealed more than just financial instructions. The messages exposed shipment schedules, coded names for drugs, and instructions for laundering money through legitimate businesses. The gang's meticulous methods, once thought unassailable, began to unravel under the relentless scrutiny of investigators. It became clear that the operation was more intricate than anyone had imagined, with multiple levels of oversight, independent cells, and carefully constructed escape routes in case of detection. As the investigation deepened, authorities turned their attention to the gang's financial empire. At first glance, the businesses seemed normal: cafes serving local customers, car dealerships with gleaming showrooms, and warehouses that appeared to handle legitimate imports. But a closer examination revealed subtle inconsistencies. Cash flows didn't match the scale of apparent sales, certain transactions were repeated through shell companies, and account transfers hinted at connections to offshore entities. Every piece of evidence painted a picture of a complex laundering operation designed to hide millions of pounds. The gang had created an illusion of normalcy, carefully masking the movement of illegal profits through everyday commerce. What made the operation particularly dangerous was its reach. The gang's influence extended beyond Liverpool, linking the city to a network of distributors and financiers across the country. Investigators realized that uncovering the financial system would be key to dismantling the entire operation. Tracing the money was painstaking work. Every transaction had to be documented, every connection verified, and every false trail identified. But each revelation brought authorities closer to understanding the full scope of the empire. It was no longer just a drug operation, it was a financial machine with tentacles reaching into the heart of legitimate commerce. While law enforcement worked tirelessly, the gang remained confident, unaware that their empire was slowly cracking from the inside. They continued to operate under the assumption that their encryption and business fronts were impervious to scrutiny. Their confidence was bolstered by years of success, by the knowledge that even the smallest mistakes in previous operations had gone unnoticed. They had grown arrogant, believing that the empire they had built was untouchable. That arrogance, as investigators would soon discover, would become their downfall. As the digital and financial threads converge, investigators began to form a clearer picture of the gang's hierarchy. Each man had a defined role. Some controlled shipments, others oversaw financial operations, while a few handled local distribution. Identifying the leaders and their responsibilities allowed law enforcement to target the network with precision, rather than relying on broad, ineffective raids. Every decrypted chat message, every traced transfer, every business record revealed the extent of their sophistication and the depth of their deception. By the end of this painstaking process, law enforcement had a roadmap of the gang's empire. What had once seemed like an untouchable criminal organization was now vulnerable, exposed in ways no one had imagined. The seemingly trivial chat message had unlocked the door to a network that had eluded authorities for years. What had begun as a single lead had transformed into a comprehensive understanding of an intricate and dangerous operation. The cracks in the gang's armor were no longer small. They were gaping, and the stage was set for law enforcement to strike. Liverpool continued its daily rhythm outside, unaware of how close the city had come to witnessing the full scope of the criminal network operating in its midst. Families walked along familiar streets, shoppers moved through markets, and commuters traveled along the waterfront. Yet behind closed doors, investigators were mapping out the collapse of an embellishment, contacts and logistics. Even within the organization, the men had limited knowledge of each other's activities, which made infiltration and exposure extremely difficult. Investigators realized that understanding these internal roles was key to dismantling the network. They began to map every connection, every transaction, and every link between businesses, individuals, and shipments, slowly constructing a blueprint of the empire. Despite the meticulous planning, there were flaws. While the gang could mask the origins of money, the sheer scale of operations meant patterns began to emerge. Certain front businesses handled more cash than they could reasonably earn. Repeated transfers to the same offshore accounts created a detectable trail. Even encrypted communications left digital fingerprints that, when pieced together, revealed a hierarchy and schedule. These weaknesses became the foundation of the authorities' strategy. Each small crack in the facade allowed investigators to expand their understanding of the operation and anticipate the gang's next move. Investigators were particularly astonished by the gang's ability to maintain the illusion of legitimacy. On paper, the businesses seemed entirely normal. Staff worked routine hours, customers appeared authentic, and taxes were often paid, giving the impression of lawful activity. Yet behind the scenes, the operations were carefully manipulated to funnel profits from drugs into the legal economy. The men had effectively created a dual existence, one visible and lawful, the other hidden and criminal. It was a system that relied on discipline, precision, and absolute secrecy. One misstep, one overlooked detail, could bring it all crashing down. As the investigation progressed, authorities also uncovered the human cost of the operation. Communities had been affected by addiction, intimidation, and fear. The gang's reach extended beyond money. It shaped lives, dictated behavior, and maintained control through coercion. Witnesses were often too afraid to speak, and the web of influence ensured silence in the neighborhoods where the gang operated. Yet, for all their power and control, investigators saw vulnerabilities that the men themselves had failed to anticipate. Their empire was vast, but it was built on patterns, structures, and predictable behavior, all of which could be exploited by careful analysis. By the time investigators had fully mapped the gang's financial and operational empire, it was clear that Liverpool had been hosting one of the most sophisticated criminal networks in the country. The evidence painted a picture of 6 men whose ambition, cunning, and ruthlessness had allowed them to operate undetected for years. But now, with every shipment traced and every transfer accounted for, the authorities were no longer chasing shadows. They had a roadmap, a plan, and the tools needed to close in. The empire that had once seemed untouchable was suddenly vulnerable, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would change the city forever. After months of meticulous investigation, law enforcement was ready to act. The work had been painstaking, but every decrypted message, every traced transfer, and every irregular business record had brought them closer to the moment when the gang's empire could be dismantled. The authorities knew they had to strike simultaneously to prevent any chance of the men fleeing, destroying evidence, or warning each other. Timing and precision would be critical. For the first time, the gang that had seemed untouchable was about to face consequences on a scale they could not control. The operation began in the early hours of a quiet morning, Teams of officers moved through Liverpool and surrounding areas, entering warehouses, shops, and homes. With careful coordination, the element of surprise was essential. Some of the men were found in the midst of their daily routines, unaware that the net had been closing around them for months. Others were in the midst of business dealings, handling what they thought were routine financial transfers. Every location held evidence of the empire's breadth. Stacks of cash hidden in offices, ledgers detailing shipments, and encrypted devices containing the digital fingerprints of years of criminal activity. Investigators discovered that the gang had left no stone unturned in their efforts to protect themselves, but even the most thorough precautions could not withstand the full weight of the authorities' preparation. In one car dealership, they found multiple accounts of disguised cash flows, invoices that had been manipulated to cover illicit transfers, and financial records revealing connections to other cities. A warehouse, which outwardly appeared to handle legitimate imports, concealed hidden compartments for storing cash and drugs awaiting shipment. Every location confirmed the investigators' suspicions. The men had created a vast, sophisticated network, but it was not invulnerable. The arrests were executed with a level of coordination that mirrored the gang's own precision. Teams moved methodically, detaining each member with minimal risk of confrontation, but the tension was palpable. Investigators were aware of the violence the men were capable of, and every officer approached with caution. Some of the gang members attempted to resist initially, but the overwhelming presence and careful planning left them with no escape. Within hours, all 6 men were in custody, marking the collapse of an empire that had operated undetected for years. The immediate aftermath of the raids revealed the scale of the operation. Officers seized significant quantities of cash, devices, documents that painted a picture of an operation far larger than anyone had imagined. Encrypted phones and computers contained communications that would later form the backbone of the prosecution's case. Financial records traced the movement of millions of pounds through legitimate and illegitimate channels, exposing the clever manipulation of businesses meant to conceal the gang's profits. Each seizure strengthened the case against the men, providing clear evidence of their roles and responsibilities within the empire. The psychological impact on the gang was immediate. Men who had believed themselves untouchable now faced the reality of their vulnerability. The carefully maintained illusion of control and power shattered in a matter of hours. Their carefully orchestrated empire, built over years of planning and risk, lay exposed before investigators. Even those who had considered themselves untouchable now realized that every step they had taken had been observed, every message decrypted, and every transaction traced. The feeling of invincibility that had guided their actions was gone. Beyond the immediate arrests, the raids sent shockwaves through the communities affected by the gang's operations. For years, residents had lived under a cloud of fear and uncertainty. Neighborhoods that had been shaped by coercion, intimidation, and subtle manipulation were suddenly aware that the empire that had controlled so much of their lives could be brought down. The presence of law enforcement, combined with the publicity surrounding the operation, offered a rare sense of relief and justice. It became clear that the gang's reach, while formidable, had limits, and those limits had been exposed in dramatic fashion. Investigators now faced the task of sorting through mountains of evidence. Every document, device, and account required careful analysis. The decrypted messages revealed hierarchies, roles, and operational patterns that confirmed suspicions built over months of surveillance. Each piece of information added clarity to a network that had been deliberately designed to be opaque and resilient. The authorities had achieved what had once seemed impossible, a full picture of an empire built on secrecy and fear. By the end of the operation, the 6 men were behind bars, facing charges that would reflect the magnitude of their crimes. The raids had succeeded not only in removing them from society, but also in exposing the intricacies of a criminal operation that had long seemed untouchable. Liverpool, a city that had been both a home and a battleground for the gang's activities, was now witness to a dramatic collapse, a reminder that even the most sophisticated criminal empires can fall when patience, precision, and determination meet criminal ingenuity. With the 6 men in custody, Liverpool's attention turned to the courts. The trial would not just be a legal proceeding, it was the stage where the full scale of the gang's operations would be revealed to the public. For years the empire had operated in the shadows, hidden behind layers of secrecy, encryption, and legitimate business front. Now prosecutors were ready to pull back the curtain and expose a criminal network that had laundered millions of pounds while distributing cocaine and heroin across the country. The evidence was overwhelming. Investigators had painstakingly documented every step of the operation. Encrypted messages, once indecipherable, now formed a detailed map of the gang's activities, exposing shipment schedules, financial transfers, and coded instructions. Financial records traced millions of pounds through businesses, offshore accounts, and shell companies, revealing the depth of manipulation and deception. Even the men's own actions had left traces, patterns that investigators could reconstruct to demonstrate planning, coordination, and deliberate concealment of illicit activity. Throughout the trial, the court heard about the empire's scope. Cafes that appeared innocent on the surface were conduits for laundering cash. Car dealerships were fronts for moving money between accounts. Warehouses that seemed to handle legitimate imports concealed hidden compartments for cash and drugs. Each piece of evidence highlighted not just the scale of the operation, but the sophistication with which it had been executed. The jury was presented with a portrait of a network that had relied on secrecy, precision, and intimidation to operate with near impunity. The prosecution also outlined the gang's hierarchy and the specific roles of each man. Some were identified as the masterminds, orchestrating shipments and financial transfers, while others were enforcers and local coordinators, ensuring that operations ran smoothly and that threats were enforced. This division of labor, once a strength that protected the gang from infiltration, became a key piece of the case. By clearly demonstrating who was responsible for each element of the empire, prosecutors removed the possibility of doubt or ambiguity about the men's culpability. Despite the weight of evidence, the trial revealed the lengths to which the gang had gone to cover their tracks. Their use of encrypted communications, offshore accounts, and seemingly legitimate businesses made the investigation extraordinarily challenging. Investigators had to follow digital breadcrumbs, unravel complex financial webs, and interpret cryptic messages. Each breakthrough came only after months of careful analysis, demonstrating not just the gang's cunning, but the persistence and expertise of law enforcement. In court, the details of this investigation highlighted how sophisticated criminal operations can thrive in plain sight, hidden within the rhythms of everyday life. The testimonies presented were also sobering. Experts described how the gang's operations affected communities, fueling addiction, fear, and economic distortion. Neighbors and local business owners spoke of intimidation and coercion, painting a picture of an environment shaped by invisible control. For years, the gang's presence had been a silent force, manipulating lives without leaving visible traces. The courtroom became a space where the hidden costs of their actions were laid bare, revealing the human consequences of an empire built on crime.